It is a recurring issue law enforcement in Minnesota can't seem to get away from: violence against officers.
Yesterday in Minnetonka, yet another reminder. 2 Hennepin County Sheriff's deputies were injured after a man opened fire while they were serving a warrant. Megan Zempel spoke with local sheriffs today about how these attacks on law enforcement continue to harm the profession. Megan.
Hi, Brock and Caitlin. The sheriffs I spoke with today call this a crisis. They say the solution is not an easy one, but stress something needs to be done or the troubling trend will continue.
It is disturbing, it's frustrating.
Olmsted County Sheriff Kevin Torgerson says the law enforcement community is reeling after 2 Hennepin County Sheriff's deputies were injured Wednesday after a man opened fire on them while they were serving a warrant. This just 2 months after 2 Burnsville police officers and 1 Burnsville firefighter paramedic were shot and killed during a standoff.
My first agency was Hennepin County Sheriff's Office. That's where I started my career. So I still know a few folks up there, and I know folks, obviously I've gotten to know Sheriff Witt up there. So yeah, right away I'm like, oh, here we go again. Data from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension shows since 2023, 9 police officers and first responders have died in Minnesota. Torgerson says the job of a law enforcement officer is more difficult than ever. He adds, misinformation and narratives from social media have hurt the profession. What we really need is for people to care about us before we get hurt. Nationally, where there's so much underlying distrust of what law enforcement does and what our purpose is, and it continues. And you know, we're doing everything they ask us to do to engage our community, and we aren't trying to harm our communities. We're trying to help our communities. Goodhue County Sheriff Marty Kelly echoes a similar sentiment. He says support needs to come not only from communities, but law enforcement also needs lawmakers to have their backs.
We feel it, we see it when things happen. We witnessed it during George Floyd, Megan, and we haven't recovered from that. So there is a lot of heartburn still in the law enforcement community towards our legislator and elected officials. What we felt was not being very supportive of us.
Kelly says healthy relationships need to be fostered with law enforcement when children are young.
And we have to get to our kids, get to our schools, and set that positive light. Those are the kind of things that lawmakers should be thinking of now. But the problem is we're going to continue to be in a crisis. I'm sorry to say it, Megan, we're going to have another, probably a law enforcement shooting in Minnesota this year. And that's very, very sad. But the reality is it's happened. It's going to happen again.
And Dodge County Sheriff Scott Rose was not able to speak with me on camera, but did give me this statement. It says in part, quote, "Unfortunately, this is yet another example of criminals being emboldened by the lack of consequences by our courts and lack of respect for our law enforcement by leaders at the Capitol. When a cop is forced to use force on a violent citizen, everyone is quick to publicly armchair quarterback his or her actions and the case. When a cop is injured or worse by a violent citizen, crickets. It's never been more frustrating or dangerous to be a cop in Minnesota, especially for the men and women serving up in the metro," end quote. And both Sheriff Torgerson and Kelly say agencies across the state continue to struggle with staffing issues, and the misinformation narrative continues to drive that. In the studio, Megan Zempel, KTTC News.
Very